She thought the moment that mattered would be loud an argument, a goodbye, a final message. But the real shift happened in the quiet, when you didn't do what she was waiting for. You didn't react. You didn't reach. You didn't try to hold the story together. And in that stillness, something subtle but powerful began to change. In this video, we're going to break down the silent shift that unsettled her, not because of anything you said, but because of what you refused to do. You'll see how Stoic presence isn't about withdrawal or ego, but about standing so firmly in your own value that your absence carries more weight than words ever could. If this speaks to where you are right now, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. Number 1. She thought she knew you. For a long time, she felt certain about you, not because she truly understood your inner world, but because your behavior followed a rhythm she had grown comfortable with. When something felt off, you reacted. When distance appeared, you reached out. When tension surfaced, you clarified. Over time, these responses created a pattern, and patterns create the illusion of understanding. She didn't need to read you deeply, she only needed to anticipate you. That anticipation gave her a sense of control, even if she never consciously framed it that way. This is where predictability quietly becomes a weakness. Not because consistency is wrong, but because emotional transparency, without restraint, teaches others how to move you. In Stoic thinking, especially in the writings of Epictetus, freedom begins where reactivity ends. A man who reveals every internal shift, every emotional response, slowly hands over leverage, not through words, but through reliability. When others know exactly how you will respond, they stop respecting the boundary between what belongs to you and what belongs to them. What unsettled her wasn't your silence itself. It was what the silence disrupted. You didn't announce a change. You didn't explain yourself. You didn't draw a line in the sand or issue a declaration of independence. You simply stopped confirming the version of you she thought she knew. No reassurance, no emotional punctuation, just absence where reaction used to be. And that absence broke the script. The human mind relies heavily on predictability to feel safe. When that predictability disappears, confidence erodes quietly at first. She may tell herself you're busy, distracted, processing. But beneath those rationalizations, something deeper shifts. The certainty she once felt that she knew where she stood with you starts to wobble, not dramatically, subtly. And subtle doubt is often more unsettling than overt loss. From a Stoic perspective, this is not about withholding or playing games. It's about reclaiming self-command. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's strength is measured by how little he needs external confirmation to remain steady. When you stopped reacting on cue, you didn't become cold, you became self-contained. And self-containment changes how others perceive you. She thought she knew you because you were readable. Now, without drama or explanation, that readability is gone. And in its place, uncertainty enters. Not because you did something to her, but because you stopped giving away access to your inner movements. That is the first crack. Number 2. Your silence felt different. At first, she tried to label it the same way she had labeled silence before. Distance, withdrawal, maybe even indifference. But something didn't quite fit. This silence didn't carry the sharpness of resentment, nor the emptiness of emotional exhaustion. It wasn't cold, and it wasn't passive. There was no bitterness leaking through it, no performative absence meant to provoke a reaction. Instead, it felt grounded. And that difference is what made it unsettling. Most silence people encounter is reactive. It's a pause filled with unspoken emotion, a waiting room for confrontation, explanation, or eventual release. This wasn't that. Your silence didn't feel like something you were enduring. It felt like something you had chosen. And choice changes the emotional weight of everything. When silence is chosen, it stops being a gap and becomes a presence. The Stoics spoke often about restraint, but not as suppression. Restraint, to them, was strength held back by judgment. Musonius Rufus describes self-control as the ability to act or not act with equal clarity, like a warrior lowering his weapon not because the fight is lost, but because he no longer needs to prove his ability to strike. That kind of restraint carries gravity. It signals command over impulse. That is the energy your silence carried. You weren't punishing. You weren't retreating. You weren't waiting to be noticed. You simply stopped participating in a dynamic that required constant emotional output from you. And because there was no visible struggle in that decision, it felt heavier than any argument ever could. Noise can be dismissed. Discipline cannot. This is why the silence lingered in her awareness. If you had gone quiet in a way that felt wounded, she could frame herself as powerful. If your absence felt sulking, she could interpret it as weakness. But this silence offered no such narrative. It didn't ask to be interpreted. It just existed, steady, unmoved, self-contained. And that creates a unique tension. Because disciplined silence doesn't invite reaction, it forces reflection. She isn't responding to what you said or did. She's responding to what you didn't need to do anymore. Your calm suggests an inner alignment she can't access, measure, or influence. From a Stoic lens, this is the quiet authority of self-mastery. Seneca wrote that true power is not loud because it does not seek witnesses. Your silence didn't announce strength. It implied it. And implication, unlike explanation, leaves space for the mind to fill in meanings far larger than words ever could. This wasn't absence. It was discipline. And discipline always weighs more than noise. Before we move on, take a moment to sit with what this kind of silence really represents. This isn't absence, it's choice, discipline, and self-command. And that shift matters more than most people realize. If this resonated with you, tap the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, or simply type, "My calm is chosen," below. Let's continue. Number 3. You didn't ask for answers. She expected questions. Not dramatic ones, but reasonable ones. Clarification. Context. Something that signaled you were still emotionally invested in restoring balance. Questions would have reassured her that the connection still required maintenance. That uncertainty made you uncomfortable enough to reach across the silence. In her mind, questions were proof of care. Proof that the emotional thread was still intact. But they never came. And that absence carried far more weight than any inquiry ever could. Because when someone asks for answers, they reveal a dependency on resolution. They signal that ambiguity is intolerable, that emotional equilibrium depends on being understood, reassured, or corrected. By not asking, you quietly demonstrated something unfamiliar to her. You were able to remain steady without knowing where things stood. Stoic philosophy places immense value on this capacity. Epictetus taught that peace does not come from controlling outcomes, but from mastering one's relationship with uncertainty. Stoic men trained themselves to stand firmly, even when explanations were withheld, promises were unclear, and futures remained undefined. Not because they didn't care, but because their stability was internal, not negotiated. When you didn't ask for answers, you removed the usual pressure point. There was no emotional pull for her to respond to, no opportunity to re-establish influence by offering clarity or withholding it. The silence became asymmetrical. She still knew how she felt, but she could no longer locate you within that emotional exchange. This is what unsettled her. Confusion is manageable when one person is visibly seeking relief from it. But when confusion exists alongside calm, The mind struggles to reconcile the two. She may have assumed you would eventually need closure, that unanswered questions would gnaw at you the way they might at her, but instead, you remained grounded, unrushed, intact. From her perspective, this creates a subtle reversal. The one who doesn't ask appears less invested but more secure, less reactive but more self-possessed. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes invincible when it no longer demands external resolution to remain whole. By not asking, you embodied that principle without ever naming it. You didn't demand clarity. You didn't seek reassurance. You didn't chase emotional symmetry. And in doing so, you revealed something deeper than detachment. You revealed self-sufficiency. That realization is more destabilizing than confusion, because confusion can be resolved. But the discovery that someone does not need resolution to stand steady forces a far more uncomfortable question. What kind of inner foundation allows that? And once that question appears, the balance quietly shifts. Number 4. You stayed calm. She was braced for something else. A reaction, an emotional spike, a moment where the tension finally broke and poured outward. Even a defensive explanation would have made sense. Anger, frustration, disappointment, any of these would have restored a familiar emotional rhythm. They would have confirmed that the situation still had the power to move you. But none of that happened. You stayed calm, not distant, not shut down, calm. This is where many misunderstand Stoicism. It was never about erasing emotion or pretending not to feel. The Stoics understood emotion as a natural response, but they warned against letting it seize command. Seneca wrote that emotion becomes dangerous not when it appears, but when it takes the reins. What you demonstrated wasn't numbness, it was governance. You felt what you felt, but you didn't surrender your behavior to it. And that distinction matters more than most realize. Emotional outbursts are easy to interpret. They give shape to a situation. They allow others to assign roles: who is hurt, who is at fault, who needs reassurance, who needs control. Calm refuses all of that. Calm denies the mind its usual anchors. When someone expects chaos and encounters composure instead, it creates a psychological rupture. She may have prepared herself to respond to intensity, to manage it, to explain it away, or even to soothe it. But calm offers no such handle. There's nothing to push against, nothing to fix, nothing to resolve. And without resistance, control slips quietly away. From a Stoic lens, this calm signals inner order. Cleanthes described the disciplined mind as one that moves in harmony with itself, regardless of external disturbance. Your composure communicated that you were not scrambling internally, even if circumstances were unresolved. That steadiness feels disruptive because it challenges an unspoken assumption: that emotional pressure always produces emotional leakage. It didn't. Your calm suggested something else entirely: that you were not emotionally cornered, that you weren't scrambling to regain footing, that you could sit with uncertainty without it spilling out as defensiveness or demand. And that kind of calm cannot be negotiated with. She may not consciously articulate it, but the effect is visceral. When someone remains composed where reaction is expected, it shifts the emotional hierarchy. The one who stays calm becomes the reference point. The one who anticipated chaos begins to feel unsettled, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the best revenge is not to be like the one who wronged you. But beyond revenge, calm has another function. It reveals self-command. And self-command quietly reorders how others perceive power. You didn't escalate. You didn't explain. You didn't collapse. You stayed calm. And in doing so, you disrupted the entire emotional script without raising your voice once. Number 5. Her certainty faded. For a long time, her sense of certainty felt effortless. She didn't question where she stood with you. She didn't need to. Your availability, your responsiveness, your emotional presence had quietly reinforced that certainty over time. It wasn't something she announced or examined. It simply existed as background truth. Like gravity, it was assumed. And when something is assumed, it rarely feels fragile. But certainty built this way is rarely tested until it is. Stoic philosophy has long warned that confidence resting on illusion cannot survive pressure. Epictetus argued that anything we believe without examining its foundation will eventually collapse when reality refuses to cooperate. Your silence introduced that pressure, but not in a confrontational way. There was no rejection, no dismissal, no dramatic withdrawal meant to wound. There was only steadiness. And steadiness is far more revealing than refusal. At first, the shift was subtle. She may have noticed it as a faint imbalance rather than a loss. A quiet sense that something no longer aligned the way it used to. The emotional ground felt less solid, though nothing concrete had changed on the surface. That's because what was fading wasn't affection or attraction, it was assumption. The assumption that she understood your limits. The assumption that your presence was guaranteed. The assumption that the emotional dynamic would always bend back into place. Your silence didn't challenge her directly. It didn't force her to defend herself or explain you away. Instead, it removed reinforcement. And without reinforcement, certainty begins to thin. The mind looks for confirmation and finds none. Not because you denied it, but because you no longer supplied it. This is where many misunderstand what truly unsettles people. Loss is often processed quickly. Uncertainty is not. When certainty fades without a clear cause, the mind can't resolve it cleanly. There's no single moment to point to, no conversation to replay, just a growing awareness that the structure she relied on may never have been as solid as she believed. From a Stoic perspective, this is the quiet effect of inner independence. Marcus Aurelius wrote that stability comes from standing on one's own reason rather than borrowed reassurance. By remaining steady without seeking reaction or validation, you demonstrated that your center of gravity had shifted inward. And when that happens, others can no longer orient themselves around you in the same way. What faded wasn't attraction. Attraction often sharpens in ambiguity. What faded was control, the unspoken confidence that she could predict, manage, or rely on your emotional availability. And when control dissolves quietly, it leaves behind something far more uncomfortable than rejection. Doubt. Not about you, but about what she thought she knew. Take a moment to let this settle. What's described here isn't loud or dramatic, but it carries weight precisely because it happens beneath the surface. Notice how certainty fades not through conflict, but through the quiet absence of reinforcement, and consider where that may have shown up in your own life. This is the kind of shift you only recognize when you slow down enough to observe it. If this resonates, reflect for a second and share your thoughts in the comments, what stood out to you, or what felt uncomfortably familiar. And if you're still processing it, you can simply type, "I master what I do not chase," as a way of marking that awareness before the story continues. Number 6. Your self-respect showed. There was no announcement, no speech about boundaries, no message explaining what you would or wouldn't tolerate going forward. You didn't draw lines with words. You drew them with behavior. And that difference mattered more than anything you could have said. For a long time, self-respect is often misunderstood as something that must be defended verbally, explaining yourself, justifying your reactions, clarifying your intentions so others don't misunderstand your worth. But the Stoics held a very different view. They believed dignity did not require explanation, because dignity, once embodied, speaks for itself. A man who knows his value does not negotiate it and does not feel compelled to prove it. That is what changed. When you stopped over-explaining, something subtle but powerful happened. You no longer rushed to clarify misunderstandings. You didn't defend your silence. You didn't try to soften your steadiness so it would be more comfortable for someone else. And in that restraint, your self-respect became visible, not as attitude, but as posture. This visibility is unsettling because it removes leverage. When someone explains themselves excessively, they invite debate. When they justify their boundaries, they invite negotiation. But when boundaries are simply lived, there is nothing to argue with. Your actions didn't ask for approval. They didn't seek agreement. They simply reflected a standard. Stoic philosophy often returns to this idea, that character is revealed most clearly, not in moments of assertion, but in moments of refusal. Refusal to chase. Refusal to overextend. Refusal to abandon inner alignment for emotional reassurance. By choosing not to explain yourself into comfort, you signaled that your peace mattered more than being understood, and that reorders perception. She may not consciously label it as self-respect at first, but she feels the shift. You are no longer positioning yourself to be evaluated. You are no longer adjusting your behavior to maintain access. You are standing where you are without apology. That quiet firmness changes how others measure you, because it suggests you measure yourself internally. Once dignity is seen, it cannot be unseen. It recalibrates expectations. What once felt negotiable now feels fixed. What once felt flexible now feels deliberate. And the dynamic adjusts accordingly, not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped behaving as if it were optional. You didn't explain your boundaries. You lived them. And that is why they finally held weight. Number 7. You stopped needing anything. For a long time, need existed quietly in the background. Not desperation, but dependence. The subtle reliance on connection to feel settled. On reassurance to feel steady. On response to feel anchored. Need doesn't always announce itself loudly. Often, it hides inside effort, availability, and emotional openness. And as long as that need is present, it creates noise, small signals that tell others where your center of gravity lies. Then that noise disappeared. You didn't withdraw affection out of bitterness. You didn't announce emotional independence or posture as unaffected. You simply stopped needing. And that absence was felt immediately, not because something was missing, but because something fundamental had shifted. Your peace no longer leaned outward. Stoic discipline was built on this exact principle. The Stoics believed that freedom begins where unnecessary desire ends. Seneca wrote that the man who needs little cannot be deprived, because nothing essential lies in another's hands. This wasn't about emotional detachment in the cold sense. It was about internal sufficiency. Wanting less, so nothing could be taken from you. When she sensed that your calm no longer depended on her presence, the emotional balance changed. Not dramatically, quietly. The invisible equation that once governed the dynamic no longer worked. Previously, your responses, your effort, your emotional availability acted as stabilizers. Now, your steadiness existed without them, and that introduces a different kind of gravity. Independence carries weight because it resists influence. It cannot be pulled, rushed, or negotiated with easily. When someone realizes they no longer hold emotional leverage, uncertainty replaces comfort. Not because they've lost importance, but because importance no longer guarantees impact. This is why independence often feels heavier than affection. Affection invites engagement. Independence invites observation. She may watch more closely now, not to reconnect, but to understand, to locate where she stands when her presence is no longer required for your equilibrium. From a Stoic perspective, this is inner wealth. Musonius Rufus taught that the disciplined man trains himself to be content with what cannot be removed by circumstance. Your peace no longer rose or fell with her attention. And because you didn't announce that shift, it felt even more real. There was no performance, no declaration, only evidence. When need disappears, so does expectation. And without expectation, dynamics recalibrate. You didn't stop caring, you stopped depending, and that difference is profound. Independence doesn't demand recognition. It simply rearranges the room. Number 8. Her old story fell apart. For a long time, she carried a story about you. Not a dramatic one, a practical one. A story that explained your role, your reactions, your emotional position in her life. Stories like this don't feel like assumptions, they feel like understanding. They help the mind stay oriented, they reduce uncertainty, and as long as reality keeps cooperating, the story feels true. In her version, you were predictable in specific ways. You would seek clarity when things became uncertain. You would react emotionally when distance appeared. You would eventually reach out to restore balance. This narrative wasn't built out of malice or calculation. It was built from repetition. Every time you confirmed the pattern, the story grew stronger. Stoicism teaches that false narratives do not need confrontation to collapse. They only need to stop being fed. Chrysippus argued that beliefs survive through reinforcement, not through truth. When reinforcement disappears, even deeply held assumptions weaken on their own. That is exactly what happened here. You didn't argue with her version of you. You didn't correct it. You didn't try to replace it with a new explanation. You simply stopped participating in it. And without your emotional responses to sustain it, the story lost its structure. This is why the collapse felt quiet rather than dramatic. There was no single moment where she realized she was wrong. No sharp contradiction. Just a growing mismatch between expectation and reality. She expected one thing, something else, or rather, nothing kept happening. And the mind struggles when it cannot reconcile its narrative with lived experience. Without your reactions, she couldn't place you. Without questions, she couldn't assign meaning. Without emotional feedback, she couldn't confirm her assumptions. The story began to fray at the edges, not because you destroyed it, but because it no longer explained what she was observing. From a Stoic perspective, this is the power of non-interference. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that truth asserts itself when false impressions are left unsupported. By staying aligned with yourself rather than correcting her perception, you allowed reality to speak on your behalf. What replaced the old story wasn't clarity, it was uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable because it forces the mind to rewrite without a template. She may now question not just what you're doing, but who you actually are when stripped of expectation. You didn't challenge her story. You starved it. And in that quiet absence of reinforcement, it dissolved, leaving behind a space where new, less controllable questions begin to form. That's the power of quiet withdrawal. No confrontation, no explanation, just absence. As her mind tries to match old expectations with your new behavior, the narrative unravels. The more she reaches for a reaction that doesn't come, the more uncertain she becomes. That's when curiosity takes over. And it all began not with what you said, but with what you withheld. If this resonates with you, let us know in the comments. What part of her old story do you think no longer fits? Or simply type, "Silence rewrites the story." And don't forget to like the video. It helps the message reach others who need it. Let's continue. Number 9. Distance hit harder than emotion. Emotion, in most dynamics, is expected. Anger invites reaction. Sadness invites comfort. Even frustration keeps the emotional channel open. Strong feelings, positive or negative, still signal engagement. They tell the other person, this still matters enough to move him. And as long as emotion is present, the connection feels active, even when it's strained. But what you offered instead was distance. Not physical distance, emotional distance. And that difference is critical. Physical absence can be explained away: busy schedules, timing, circumstance. Emotional unreachability cannot. It signals a boundary that does not ask to be crossed. Stoic detachment is often misunderstood as avoidance, but the Stoics defined it very differently. Detachment was not withdrawal from life, it was mastery over impulse. Zeno taught that the disciplined mind does not allow emotion to drag it into unnecessary struggle. When you stepped back emotionally, you weren't escaping discomfort. You were choosing self-command over engagement. This is why the distance landed so heavily. There was no conflict to push against, no argument to respond to, no visible emotion to soothe or provoke. Your emotional channel went quiet not as a tactic, but as a state. And that created a rare psychological experience: consequence without conflict. Conflict gives closure. It allows blame, justification, resolution. Distance offers none of that. It leaves the mind alone with its own interpretations. She may replay past moments, searching for the emotional thread she used to feel. But there's nothing to pull on now. No resistance, no tension, just absence where access once existed. That absence feels heavier than anger because it cannot be managed. Anger can be redirected. Sadness can be softened. Distance simply is. And because it isn't dramatic, it cannot be dismissed as temporary emotion. It feels final, not because you said it was, but because nothing contradicts it. From a Stoic perspective, this is inner sovereignty. Seneca wrote that the strongest position is the one that does not require response. By becoming emotionally unreachable, you didn't escalate. You ended the emotional exchange without closing the door through force. She didn't feel attacked. She felt the weight of consequence. The realization that access to you once assumed was no longer automatic, and that realization lands deeper than emotion ever could. Because emotion passes. Distance redefines. Number 10. She noticed your growth. You never told her you were changing. There were no declarations of self-improvement. No posts. No explanations. No attempt to be seen as evolved or healed. And yet, something about you felt different. Not louder. Not more impressive. Quieter. Slower. More deliberate. You didn't announce progress, you moved differently. Stoic growth has always been subtle like that. The Stoics believed real development shows not in what a man claims, but in how he chooses. In his pacing. In what he no longer rushes toward. In what no longer provokes him. Growth, in this sense, is not expansion, it's refinement. The removal of excess reaction. The strengthening of judgment. That refinement was felt. While you were focused inward on restoring balance, discipline, and clarity, she began noticing the contrast, not consciously at first. It appeared as a vague comparison. Her emotional state felt busy, reactive, restless. Yours felt settled. And comparison doesn't require conversation. It happens instinctively when two energies no longer match. What made this especially noticeable was the absence of performance. If you had tried to display growth, it would have invited skepticism. If you had spoken about healing, it would have framed your progress as a response to her. But you did neither. Your steadiness existed without reference. And that gave it authenticity. From a Stoic perspective, this is the mark of internal alignment. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul advances by removing what is unnecessary, not by adding decoration. You weren't trying to be better. You were becoming clearer. And clarity has a gravitational pull of its own. She may notice it in small ways. You no longer linger emotionally. You don't revisit the same topics. You don't seek reassurance or validation. Your responses, if any, carry less urgency, less charge, more space. And in that space, your growth becomes undeniable because it is no longer reactive. This is where discomfort can emerge for her, not out of jealousy, but awareness. Awareness that while you are moving forward quietly, she may still be circling familiar emotional ground. Your calm becomes a mirror she didn't ask for. And mirrors don't accuse, they reflect. Growth doesn't need to be visible to be felt. It only needs to be consistent. You didn't change to be noticed. You changed to be aligned. And alignment always shifts the emotional atmosphere around it, whether anyone comments on it or not. Number 11. Reaching out feels heavy now. There was a time when reaching out felt effortless, casual, low risk. A message could be sent without much thought, because the emotional ground beneath it felt stable. Contact didn't require courage, it required convenience. The dynamic was familiar enough that communication felt like continuation, not exposure. That changed. Now, the idea of reaching out carries weight. Not because you made it difficult, but because the old structure that made it safe no longer exists. When you stopped chasing, stopped clarifying, stopped restoring emotional balance for her, you removed the cushion that made contact feel consequence-free. And without that cushion, every possible message now feels exposed. The Stoics believed that meaningful action should never be casual. Zeno taught that when a person acts with intention, the act itself carries gravity. Weight, in this sense, is not heaviness, it is significance. By refusing to pursue, you restored significance to action. Silence returned value to movement. If she were to reach out now, it wouldn't feel like checking in. It would feel like stepping forward without knowing the ground. There's no guarantee of emotional return, no predictable response, no reassurance that the message will restore the old dynamic. And that uncertainty makes vulnerability unavoidable. This is what makes the moment feel risky. Vulnerability is only threatening when control is gone. Before, reaching out allowed her to maintain orientation, to test, adjust, and re-establish influence if needed. Now, the same action would reveal something personal: curiosity, uncertainty, or even fear of loss. And revealing that requires courage. From a Stoic lens, this is the natural consequence of restraint. You didn't punish. You didn't close the door dramatically. You simply stopped making contact easy. And in doing so, you transformed communication from habit into decision. The weight she feels isn't pressure from you. It's awareness. Awareness that the dynamic has shifted, and that any attempt to reconnect would require sincerity rather than safety. That the message would say more about her than about you. And that is why hesitation appears before action. Not because she doesn't want to reach out, but because reaching out now would mean stepping into uncertainty without the old emotional guarantees. Stoicism teaches that courage emerges only when comfort is gone. And because you didn't chase, the comfort vanished quietly. What remains is a choice. And choices, when they matter, always feel heavy. Before we move forward, take a moment to sit with what this really means. Notice how the shift didn't come from words, explanations, or effort, but from restraint. When you stopped making connection easy, you didn't create distance. You created significance. That change invites an uncomfortable kind of awareness, the kind that asks honest questions instead of offering emotional safety. Reflect on where in your own life comfort has disguised habit, and where silence has quietly restored meaning. This pause isn't empty, it's instructive. Let it land. Number 12. She finally sees you. What settles in now isn't regret. Regret looks backward and tries to rewrite events. What she feels is something quieter and far more lasting. Recognition, the kind that arrives slowly, without drama, when the mind finally aligns with what has been unfolding all along. For a long time, she didn't truly see you. She saw a version shaped by access, by availability, by emotional responsiveness. That version wasn't false, but it was incomplete. It was filtered through the roles you were willing to play, the effort you were willing to give, and the reactions you were willing to offer. When those layers were present, they obscured something deeper. Stoic men never demanded to be understood. The Stoics believed that truth does not need defense, it needs time. Marcus Aurelius wrote that character reveals itself not through explanation, but through consistency. When you stopped giving your power away through overreaction, over-availability, or emotional negotiation, what remained was not a new version of you. It was the original one. That's what she's seeing now. Not a transformation, but a clarification. The steadiness that was always there, now unobstructed. The self-command that existed beneath the noise. The independence that had been muted by effort. In removing yourself from the old dynamic, you didn't become stronger, you stopped diluting your strength. This recognition carries weight because it can't be undone. Regret can fade, attraction can fluctuate, but recognition changes memory. She may revisit past moments now and see them differently, not with longing, but with understanding. The way you handled uncertainty, the way you didn't collapse under distance, the way you remained intact without explanation. All of it rearranges itself in her mind, and that realization lands without conflict. There's no argument to resolve, no apology to extract, just the awareness that the man she thought she understood was never fully visible until he stepped back. From a Stoic perspective, this is the final confirmation of inner alignment. You didn't demand validation. You didn't chase recognition. You allowed time, silence, and consistency to do their work. And when truth reveals itself this way, it does not need persuasion. What she feels now is the weight of clarity, not loss, not longing, but the understanding that power was never taken from you. You simply stopped handing it out. And once that is seen, it cannot be unseen. In the end, nothing dramatic had to happen for everything to change. There was no confrontation to point to, no final conversation to replay. The shift happened because you chose steadiness over reaction, self-command over explanation, and inner alignment over emotional noise. What unsettled her was never your silence alone, it was the clarity behind it. When you stopped giving away access to your inner world, the dynamic reordered itself naturally, not through force, not through strategy, but through quiet consistency. And that is the essence of Stoic presence. Standing so firmly in your own center that truth reveals itself without you having to say a word. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, leave a comment sharing what stood out most, and watch the recommended videos on screen to continue this journey of calm, clarity, and self-mastery.